Hello, this is a review on federalism. So what you need in front of you right now is your federalism packet. As we go through the packet, you can fill in your answers and be listening and thinking about what we're talking about, why we're saying it, and really why it's important. You just remember also in this video, you do not need to use the whole video if you don't want to. So don't be worried if it's really long. You can go to the area, the section you need to, because at the beginning there is a table of contents that will tell you what minute or time spot to go to. So first, when we start anything, we always start with vocabulary. We gotta build that vocab. So here are some of the key words we're gonna be using as we go through the video today. First word is occurring every 2 years. So the definition's occurring every 2 years. This means biennial. This is something that happens only at the state level in Virginia. They do a biennial budget. The next word says a written document that gives power. Well, we call this, in the United States, a charter. You've already heard this in relation to the charters of the Virginia Company of London. Now we're going to talk about it in relation to local powers related to what they can do. So they're giving a charter, which is like, here's everything you can do. To support and encourage means to promote. To go into effect, they enact. So enact laws means they put into effect rules. And then derived means taken from. Where are those powers derived from for state, national, state, and local? Have to do with business. It kind of looks like commercial would be commerce. Okay? So business is commerce in this sense. Then pressure or stress, argument, tension. A command from a higher authority. A mandate, usually here as a mandatory, something you must do. To manage, to be in charge of, is administer. Sometimes you hear it as administrator. And to control or make rules for would be regulate. Like you hear of regulations. Sometimes you hear soccer regulations. Those are like the rules of the game. We're going to talk about rules in the form of regulations. So after they make laws, sometimes they need to make additional regulations added to those laws to kind of make sure those laws are enforced and carried out. And then last but not least is a local law, which is an ordinance. So if you ever see the word ordinance, your brain should always think local. Like Loudoun County is local. Leesburg is the town, which is local. The city would be local, like Richmond. Okay? So even though it's in Virginia, and it's a couple hours away like Richmond, it's still a city, and that's considered local because it's a small area that's gotten power from the state government. Now, let's talk about federalism, because this is what the whole act is about. What is federalism? Well, federalism is the dividing and sharing of power between the national, that's the United States government, the state, like Virginia, and local levels of government. They each have different jobs that they carry out. Sometimes they overlap, they're shared, they both do it, versus sometimes one of them has all the power and the other one shouldn't be doing it. This is what we're going to be talking about. So, why do we have federalism? It's because of this guy right up here. King George got a little too powerful, and having power concentrated in the hands of one or just a few, our founding fathers like James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, Washington, they didn't really like that. So they had to come up with a creative solution. That's where federalism comes in. Okay? So, we have 3 levels called the national, the state, and the local. What do they do exactly? National gets delegated powers. Powers that are given to them. They're given to them from the United States Constitution. The national government sometimes is considered supreme, but in this case, in this class, we're going to consider it the majority of the time supreme. So if they make a rule, state and local governments have to follow it. They're kind of like the parents, okay? State levels have those reserved powers. Those are saved, kind of like you reserved a table at a restaurant, or reserve a seat at the movie theater. Those are the saved powers. So any power not given to the national government is reserved for the states. And hopefully you're thinking, that does sound familiar. I think that sounds like one of the amendments that are part of the Bill of Rights. And you're correct. It'd be the 10th Amendment that it would be part of. So, Constitution. It establishes the federal form of government, which is federalism. The national level is supreme, and it gets its power from the United States Constitution. State level derives, that means it's taken its power from the national government, and it's defined in the Virginia Constitution. So the national level, that 10th Amendment gives the state powers, and then they actually write it out and say, here's what we're going to do with those powers, here's how they're organized in something called the Virginia Constitution. Then the state then says, you know what, we're going to give the local government some powers too. And we're going to define that in a charter. Instead of calling it a constitution, we're going to call it a charter at the local level. And then the U.S. Constitution denies certain powers from both national and state. So, for example, the president can't call himself or herself a king. That would go against the powers given in the United States Constitution. That would make them too powerful. And then, of course, the 10th Amendment says powers not given to the national government are reserved. They're saved for the states, which we're going to talk about later in this presentation. So, what is each level responsible for? National's got foreign policy. That means they work with other countries. They make rules, agreements with other countries. Okay? Regulate commerce. It means they control business or trade between states. And they provide for the common defense. They protect us. Like you have the U.S. Army, the United States Marines, Navy, National Guard, Air Force. They're all helping protect us, keep us safe. The state, though, some powers that are reserved for them, promote public health, safety, welfare. Okay, so public health, in theory, tends to mean make sure their citizens are healthy. Safety, talk about police, fire department, their house is on fire. It's going to be the state really supporting that or giving powers to the local government to help support that. So, for example, Loudoun County Fire Department gets its powers because the state said, here, local government, you can better take care of this. We're going to give you this power. And then it can promote the welfare or the well-being of individuals. It means they're going to help them out where they can, where it makes sense. However, national government sometimes gets a little too enthusiastic about some ideas that they think are going to make sense for everyone. So what they do, they sometimes make laws that can cause tension between national and state levels. And sometimes it works vice versa too. So what happens is the federal government makes mandates. It means they must do it. So they require states, it's mandatory, to do certain things. However, the federal government doesn't always give them the funding they need, the money they need to carry it out. So it might be really nice if the federal government said, you know what, every student needs a computer. Some sort of device when they go to school, even if they can't afford it. So, the federal government makes a law, says all public schools have to provide a device. Challenge, though, is those devices cost money, and that means states have to pay for them. And when the federal government doesn't give them the money, states go, well, where do we exactly get this money from? I don't want to increase taxes. My citizens of my state aren't going to like that. People who live there, the residents, they're not going to like that. So it can cause a lot of tension between the two levels of government. A little bit of arguing goes on. Looking at the bottom of your sheet here, it says put the phrases or pictures in the right place. I know you don't have pictures in front of you, but think about where public welfare would go. Think about where common defense would go. Think about public safety, where that would go. Health, where would that go? Just log them in to national or state. Foreign policy. Then on the next page, we're going to jump down. We thought about the national government. Well, the state government is set up very similar. They're just going to use slightly different names. So in the state government, we have the Virginia Constitution, which distributes power. It means they give power to 3 branches of government. Once again, they don't want to have a king. They don't want to have one person in charge. So we have legislative, executive, judicial branch. Who is it exactly? In the legislative branch, we have a General Assembly. Now I'm going to walk you through what is important about it. Basically, what can they do? The General Assembly can make laws. They make the rules for our state. They have a bicameral, or they're bicameral, which means there's 2 parts. Part 1 is the House of Delegates, and Part 2 is the Virginia Senate. Now remember, the national government is bicameral also. You have the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. We want to be similar, so they set up a similar system at the state level. Instead of the House of Representatives, we have the House of Delegates. Instead of U.S. Senate, because it's not the whole country, it's the Virginia Senate. And instead of meeting fairly regularly, they meet annually for a fixed number of days. It means 1 time a year. Now, the executive branch, there's a governor. Governor is going to make sure the laws that are made by the General Assembly are carried out. They're making sure they're enforced, executed, all mean the same thing. The governor is also going to appoint members of their cabinet. It means they pick. Those are people who help the governor carry out the state bureaucracy, like education, state transportation, different things like that. Who are the people who are really high up in the executive branch? Are the lieutenant governor. Instead of a vice president, we call him the lieutenant governor, because the lieutenant governor is number 2 at the state level. So if you ever see lieutenant governor, you should automatically think state number 2. And then we have an attorney general. That's another word for a lawyer. They're a lawyer for the state. So if the state gets sued or needs to sue or they need to get involved in something legal, we have a lawyer for the state. All positions, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and the governor are elected for 4-year terms. Something unique to Virginia, though, is the governor can only be elected to be the governor 1 time. They cannot do it consecutively. They can only be elected for 4 years and they're done. Then, in the judicial branch, we have the state courts, made up of the Virginia Supreme Court, the Virginia Court of Appeals, the Circuit Court, the General District Court, right? And the Domestic and Juvenile Relations Court. That whole SACT JD. So how many levels of the state court are there? Actually, we're going to say, for our sake, we're going to say 4. 4, okay? Then, what can the state court do? Well, the main job, besides looking over laws, cases, different things like that, we call it judicial review. They review the state Supreme Court. They review the state constitution to make sure people and the government is following it. So the same thing that the national judicial branch does, the U.S. Supreme Court does, but they only do it for the state level. Okay, so remember I gave that example of the moment of prayer that the state court decided it went against freedom of religion. It sounded like a state was supporting it. So the Virginia Supreme Court ended up overturning it. So now we have something called the moment of silence today. That was judicial review. They were the judges who reviewed the Virginia Constitution, kind of like our rule book for our state, and making sure the other branches are following. They're like our referees for the state. And this is kind of what I just mentioned. The Virginia Constitution distributes power between the 3 branches of government. We have the legislative, which is called the General Assembly. It's made up of House of Delegates, the Virginia Senate. And then we have the executive, who is our governor. Then we have lieutenant governor. And then underneath that, you can even add in attorney general. That's the lawyer for the state. And then a 3rd branch is the Virginia Supreme Court. So the highest court in Virginia. How are laws made in Virginia? Well, the state legislative branch, which is the General Assembly, is responsible for making state laws. That's the House of Delegates and the Virginia Senate. What they do, they go through the ICDVG. I can't drive very greatly. Same steps as the national. It's instead of ICDVP, it's the governor signing it now. So at the national was the president, now it's the governor signing it. That's the only difference. So if you guys remember that ICDVG is governor. Now, the introduced means the idea was introduced by somebody as a delegate in the House of Delegates or a Virginia senator from the Virginia Senate. They get their ideas from the interest groups, individuals, the governor, anywhere really they can get it from. And then if they think it's a really good idea, they introduce it in. Then it goes to the specific committee. So say it had to do with the environment, it go to the environmental committee. That's just a small group working on it and thinking, all right, does this make sense? Can we make this work? Is this even a good idea? Before it goes up to major debate on the floor for everybody to talk to. Kind of make it simpler, working out the kinks before it goes to everybody. And then after the debate, it goes up for vote. Say it was introduced in the House of Delegates, and then it went through the introduced committee, debate, vote. If it won the vote, they would go over to the Virginia Senate. And then go through the same process. And at the very end, the governor can either sign or veto it. If he vetoes it, he's showing that fundamental principle of limited government. So there's only really two more actions that the state could take then. They could override the veto, or they can change what the governor doesn't like about it. If neither of those happen, though, it usually ends up dying, which means it doesn't become a law, and nothing really happens with it after that. What can the state do exactly? Let's go into a little more detail about that. Well, the state tries to fix some problems or issues its citizens have. Its people who live in the state have. So they promote education. So, for example, the reason you're watching this video is because you have a standards of learning, an SOL, to do that the state says it is a required thing to make sure we're meeting minimum standards. They promote public health. They protect the environment, can make sure we're not drinking bad water that's making us sick, to make sure we're breathing clean air, things like that. They pass a state budget. Something unique to us is every 2 years, though. So at the national level and the local level, they do it annually, which is one time a year. Here, though, the state budget is every 2 years. And then, of course, the fun word you guys keep seeing, you're like, what is that? Levy and collect taxes. Just a fancy way of saying you're paying them some money so they can pay for services. So it's called revenue. Think of revenue as taxes in this class. What's the executive branch all about? Well, the state executive branch is the governor. And the governor gets his powers from the Virginia Constitution. What sort of roles does he take on when he's using those powers? This is the question. This is where we always get stuck. Just remember what you learned about the president. What the president does. The president is commander-in-chief, chief of state, different things like that. Governor is going to be almost exactly the same again. So if you feel really strong, you're national. Let's see how strong we're going to be at the state. So in charge of ceremonies. That's going to be chief of state, because it sounds like ceremonies. Proposes laws as chief legislators. He can ask for laws. So focus on those L's. Okay? So if you see somebody speaking to Congress and it's labeled, or the General Assembly, it's labeled governor, you would know he's acting as a chief legislator. Now the president does the same exact thing, but he'd be speaking specifically to Congress. Governor also acts as the chief administrator. This is the one little difference. Instead of calling it a chief executive at the state level, we're going to call it a chief administrator. They're the boss. Kind of like your principal is an administrator. They also act as the party chief in the state. So Governor Terry McAuliffe is a Democrat, which means he's going to be the party chief for Virginia Democrats. Then we do have a state militia, which allows him to act, or her, but in this time, at this moment, it's Terry McAuliffe as commander-in-chief. He has power over the Virginia National Guard. So if there's an emergency, he could call them in. He can help support the state to help out in instances of state of emergencies. Who helps the governor? Can't do it all himself. It's a lot of work. Kind of like the president has those federal bureaucracies, in the cabinet. The state governor has the same thing. It's still a lot of work, even though you're running a state. Lots of work. So the governor has lieutenant governor, that number 2 person in charge. Just like the president is the vice president, governor has lieutenant governor. Kind of sounds like a military general almost. He also has an attorney general, gives him legal advice. And then he has a cabinet. The cabinet is a group of experts that give him advice, and they run certain state bureaucracies for him, so he doesn't have to make all the decisions himself. Constantly. That would be impossible. So these people administer the laws, they enforce laws, they regulate businesses, which means they can control business within the state, and they work on providing services to Virginians. Well, what if Virginia, in its residents, they don't like the Virginia Constitution, they don't like something in it? Or maybe they want to add something to it or remove something. You can do that. That's what's really cool about our government. Our government allows for an amendment, which is a change. We can ratify an amendment, which means to approve. And it's really pretty simple, but it also takes a lot to make it happen. So the idea of proposing and ratifying, what proposing is the asking. You can think of like a marriage proposal, and ratification would be the yes or no on it, the approval of that marriage proposal. It's easy to ask. Sometimes it's really, really hard to convince, though. So the proposal in Virginia, in order to change the Virginia Constitution, you only need the Virginia General Assembly. Okay? And in the Virginia General Assembly, you just need a majority. The ratification is done by the voters in Virginia, though. So it's slightly different than the national government. A little bit easier, but still trying to convince people to change this document that's been in place for so long can be really challenging. But all that happens is proposal by General Assembly, ratification by voters. The way I remember it, I always remember as purple gators. Purple gators rarely vote. PGVR. That is one little trick to help me remember. So you guys, what you should do is pause this video at this moment and come up with your own little memory trick to help you out. And then share that memory trick with someone in your family, or share it with a teacher, or share it with a friend. Something that help you remember it. Alright, off to the next slides. So, what do we have left to discuss? We've already talked about the national level. We've already talked about the state level. You guys got it. We have the local level to discuss. Loudoun County. We have county level, like Loudoun County. We have town level, like Leesburg. We have city level, like Richmond. Looking at it, we have counties, cities, and towns, which hopefully is what you were thinking. If not, that is okay, because that's why we're reviewing this right now. So, in your county, city, or town where you live, you guys actually have the greatest influence on decisions. One of the reasons why you have the greatest influences on decisions is because it's such a smaller population. You live next to these people. For example, Mr. Greason, he comes to visit some schools locally because he lives so close and he wants to meet with you guys. He wants to meet with the people who helped elect him into office. They are our neighbors. They are people who want to make good decisions for us here. So how does local government get its power? So all powers of local government in Virginia are given to them by the Virginia Constitution and the General Assembly. So the Constitution of Virginia says, here are your powers, and the General Assembly can go above and beyond that, give them extra powers. Now, all cities and counties are not given the same powers. So no, they have different powers. Like a county might have different jobs than a city, and vice versa. Cities get their powers from a charter. Remember that word charter, from a vocab, from the beginning of the year, from the fundamental principles, or the founding documents, these charters. So we have Loudoun County, Town of Leesburg, City of Richmond. All of the above, or below that I just showed you, Board of Supervisors, Mayor Council. Mayor Council, those are people who really enact the laws and carry out the laws. So like the mayor of the city town, they carry out the laws, where councils enact the laws, they make the laws. And by laws, I really should be using, hopefully you guys are thinking this, an ordinance. So they enact ordinances, which are those local laws. Just a fancy word for local laws. So if you ever see ordinance, think local laws. So counties. Who is it? Board of Supervisors, where cities and towns have councils. They enact ordinances. They adopt an annual budget, which is one time a year. Executive branch, though, there's none for counties. We do have a sheriff, a county sheriff, but technically they're not someone who's can veto ideas by the Board of Supervisors. Where a mayor could get involved with the council and change their opinions and do those things. So they carry out ordinances. You notice this is key. They're elected by the voters. Okay, they're not choosing each other. It's us that chooses them. And then the judicial branch, they all use the same local courts. So all powers in Virginia, kind of similar to what I already showed you right here. General Assembly, Virginia Constitution gives powers to local government. Charters are given to cities, and not all cities and counties have the same powers. Now, looking at your sheet here, it's really important to remember what positions are required by the Virginia Constitution. That means they must have them. So in Loudoun County, we do have a sheriff, we have a commissioner of revenue, and we have a treasurer. So the people who collect the money, the people who end up saying this is how we're going to spend the money based on how the Board of Supervisors tells them what to do. In Loudoun County, we do have a manager, but it's optional. We don't necessarily need one. Okay? Now, looking at what are the powers of local government. Local government do 7 powers based on those reserved powers, things that are given to them because the national government was not given to them. So that's the 10th Amendment. So they create a biennial budget. And then I misspoke. The 7 powers below that the local government has are not binding a budget. That would be state level. So it's the local government we're looking at. So they enforce state and local laws. That would be one of them. So highlighted are all the 7 powers local government has. You can see some of these powers are shared with state government. Some are given to them by the state government. So like you guys go to Loudoun County Public Schools, but the reason they exist is because the state government says, Loudoun County, you need to create your own schools. We're going to let you do that. We're going to let you make some of the decisions yourself. That's best for your residents that live in your county. So what do they do? Exactly. These 4 things. They help with public health by giving out vaccinations. They have the sheriff, which is a local police that helps with public safety. They bring international business to Loudoun. So one Loudoun is trying to attract international business there so they can have new kind of cool restaurants that aren't necessarily from this area. And then, of course, they try to protect the wildlife. So you can see like down here we have the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And then keywords, phrases, you guys can just fill that in. So you, like delegates, where would that go? State. Promote public safety. You put in state. And then local. Virginia Constitution, where would that go? U.S. Constitution, where would that go? So think about the words you can put in there that'll really help you out. Now, at this point in the video, if you don't have a whiteboard, you can just grab a piece of paper. And what you should draw on this piece of paper is this chart. So the legislative, executive, judicial branch, national, state, and local. And what you can label in the chart is everything that is part of the structure of that government. So what I would do is pause the video at this point. Alright, now you should check your answers. Hopefully you had all these for with the structure of government. Then you can pause the video at this point and use the words up here and add it in. So you're going to add it in. Hopefully you add it in and you put it on the correct level. Same thing, we're going to add in some more words. Where would they go? So you should pause the video and add in the words where you think there you go. Some might even go up top here. And here are the words. Check where you put them.